rolling here, and people may continue joining, and that's absolutely fine. So good morning, everybody. My name is Sarah Ogletree, and I am the program coordinator at North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light. I am the primary contact person for NCIPL for congregations in the state. So if we are just now meeting in this strange virtual way, I'm grateful to be with you here this morning, and I hope that we have many more conversations. But we are here this morning to have a conversation about women's voices and the movement for climate and environmental justice. And it is International Women's History Month, and we're really excited at NCIPL to be able to facilitate this conversation and to be joined by 4 wonderful practitioners of faith-based climate and environmental action in North Carolina. So today we are joined by the Reverend Stephanie Allen. Stephanie, you can wave. Stephanie is the priest at Church of the Nativity in Raleigh, and also a founder or co-founder, or one of the founders of Zero Waste Church, which is a great initiative helping congregations do different environmental initiatives and actions from a place of faith, specifically composting, carbon farming, a lot of wonderful initiatives dealing with soil health. And we're really grateful to have you, Stephanie, with us today. Thanks for being here. We have Penny Hooper. You can wave, Penny. Penny is a wonderful member of our North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light Advisory Council. She is a marine scientist. She is a Unitarian Universalist, and she has been involved in this movement for a very long time. We're so grateful to have you, Penny. She has a lot of wonderful knowledge specifically about our coast, and we're really grateful to hear from her. We have Candace Laughinghouse. Hey, Candace. Candace is all but dissertation. We're very excited, right? All but dissertation in her PhD in theology, dealing with ecowomanism, animal rights, spirituality, and the environmental movement. So we're really grateful to get to hear from Candace today as well. And we also have Karen Richardson Dunn. Karen's video is not working, but she is here among us, and she will offer her voice for us in a moment. She is an ordained pastor in the United Church of Christ, or minister in the United Church of Christ. She is also one of my colleagues at the North Carolina Council of Churches in our Partners in Health and Wholeness program. And she is the director of the United Church of Christ Southern Conference Creation Justice Network. So that's a group helping United Church of Christ congregations do this work of environmental and climate justice. All of you, I'm so grateful to have you. I think this is going to be a really fruitful conversation. We're going to move forward by allowing our panelists to offer their stories in this movement, how they got involved in this work, what they've learned, and then we'll have some questions to follow up. So if you have any questions as our speakers are talking, you can use the chat box. If you hover your arrow down in Zoom to the bottom bar, you will see a speech bubble, and it will say chat underneath that. You can open up that chat box. Ask any questions, and our director, Susanna Tuttle, will be managing the chat box to make sure that we get to your questions and have the opportunity to answer them. So thanks again for joining us, and I am now going to pass the mic over to Stephanie Allen. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this and to talk with you all today. It has been a strange time, but I'm really glad to be here because the work does continue. As Sarah said, I'm the priest at Church of the Nativity, which is an Episcopal congregation, and we're located in North Raleigh. So we're very, very suburban, but we're also tucked away inside this little enclave of trees and green space. And the church is relatively new for an Episcopal church. We're only 35 years old. So in Episcopalian terms, we're babies, right? And environmental stewardship has always been an active ministry here in this church from the beginning. I arrived 9 years ago, and there was already an environmental stewardship team going. When through the years, we started things like a community garden where we plant vegetables to give to the Interfaith Food Shuttle and other folks and other places. A bird-friendly pollinator garden here on our campus. We made a commitment to only planting native plants here on our campus and getting rid of the other things. We've done an energy audit through NCIPL and made all those changes. We have an outdoor preschool that meets here. So you could say our environmental stewardship program was really thriving and going well. And then about 4 years ago, there was a spark that we learned about that set us on fire, and I think took us to the next level and realized that God was speaking to us in a very clear way about what we could do as a congregation to make some serious impact on climate change. And that was through composting. And we learned about the work through Kevin Drew and San Francisco, and the work of the Marin County project of taking compost, spreading it on rangeland, and seeing what that did to the soil. And at the same time, San Francisco is starting a curbside composting program for residents of the city to try and divert materials from the landfills, which were getting full. And what they found, as Kevin described it, was that they were finding that 1 acre of rangeland spread with 1 inch of compost was effectively removing 1 ton of carbon from the atmosphere in a year, which is astounding. They went back the next year without reapplying the compost, just that same 1 inch that had been on the previous 2 years, and another ton. They now have 10 years of data, 1 ton of compost for every year from that single inch of compost. And when we learned this, as one of my colleagues said, this was a gift from God. This was very clear that there was work to be done here, that their word could be spread, and this was something that Church of the Nativity wanted to be part of and to do. So we took that as our initial first step and decided we would go all out and try to be a zero waste church. And we would really focus our efforts as a church into how we could get some studies done and some work done in carbon sequestration here in the state of North Carolina, being such an agriculturally heavy state, and knowing it would be different than what was happening in California. But to start getting those conversations going, getting key people together in the same rooms to say, what could we do to do something like this in North Carolina? So we got a grant from the National Episcopal Church to start gathering people together and also to share this message with churches. Now, we as a church have been composting, and we compost in different ways. We have backyard composting. We also use a commercial compost service, but we are really committed to trying not to throw anything in the landfill. And so we were asked by other churches, like, how are you doing this? What are you doing? And so we started a webpage called zerowastechurch.org and sharing what we've done, what we've learned, and then gathering also communities for 2 conferences that we've had now about composting called Waste Not, and talking about how churches might implement these practices and think about them. And really what we found is that as we go further in this and we think about this theologically as well, that composting aligns with what the church is already doing. So many of our churches talk about food insecurity and work on food insecurity. Food waste definitely is a big part of this. If we can keep food waste out of the landfill, it decreases methane production, which is even worse than the carbon going into the atmosphere. Also, if we can divert food waste and we can get food where it's needed before it ends up in the landfill, again, working on that food insecurity piece and making our soil healthier. The truth is that this putting compost just even in your backyard will make your soil healthier, which then will allow us to grow healthier food and to use better agricultural practices for growing our food. So all of these, deeply connected to, what I just said during Ash Wednesday when I smeared ashes on everyone's forehead and remember your dust. And we came from the dirt. We are connected to the dirt. So really reconnecting ourselves to that. And the congregation responded with great gusto. And it's been really wonderful to watch as we've had a combination of individual action from members of the congregation at different levels. Some people have also gone all in and are trying to be zero waste at home as well. Other people are doing their best to bring in their composting here to church, and that's what they're doing, and that's good. That's good. But we also realize that this is something that can make a tremendous difference on an institutional level. And as we as an institution can talk to our sister congregations as institutions, we have a lot of power there. And then also the rest of our communities. How can we help our schools compost? How can we get this into our collective consciousness? So this is just something that we do. This is a way of life. So I would say, just to kind of wrap up of where we're going next, is what we want, what we desire, what I think we're moving towards is that environmental stewardship for us as a congregation is not a side ministry, but it is a key part of our identity, how we understand our faith, how we understand our worship life together, and that every decision we make, we ask what the impact is going to be on creation. And we try to make the best decision that we can in regards to that. And again, that's been a change for us. It means doing this ministry in a different way, and it's not just simply a side program that a couple of people do. So it's exciting, it's fun. We are hearing from leaders about doing this more in North Carolina and getting some farmers to try a study. So that has been slow, but it seems to be unfolding, which is exciting. So that's Zero Waste Church and Church of the Nativity.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. I'm so encouraged every time I hear you speak about the work that you guys are doing. It's just beautiful, beautiful work, and I look forward to learning more about it and having some time for questions here in a bit. Candace, moving on to you.
Okay, I guess you can hear me now, unmuted. Okay, my name is Candace. Laughing House has already been said, and I began my interest in environmental work or climate justice work upon learning. Well, first I was in a PhD program, or so I still am, but the interest was the field of womanist thought, and I'll get into that in a minute. And then it became a thing where I had made the decision to eat a plant-based diet. It was for health reasons at first. And then that transitioned to learning about how food got made, and then of course, then learning more on how the monopolization of animal agriculture and what it does to the environment. And so then what I ended up doing is seeing the connections with the oppressions of land, animals, and people, and primarily seeing the connection with how minoritized communities are affected with the destruction of the land and the continued growth of animal agriculture. So I'll begin first, because it's a term that I'll use a few times. It's called womanist thought. And womanist thought is a branch of feminism, and I'm sure many people know what feminism is, but what they do seek to do is to make it a little bit different, in that womanist thought is a 4-part definition, and looking at how as women, as African-American women, wanting to know more than what is considered, excuse me, as you all know that we're homeschooling right now, unintentionally. So there are 4 different, as I said, definitions. And the first one is radical subjectivity. And that's basically reclaiming your identity. And in reclaiming your identity, it's, as Black women, many times, or a lot of the times, we're looked at and told like how our hair should be, how we should look, how we should identify ourselves, even within our relationships with one another, and even in relationships with men and women. So radical subjectivity is reclaiming your own identity. The second definition is traditional communalism, which is how it differentiates a little bit from feminism, especially from traditional feminism, is that womanists look at the fact that, okay, we're going to seek justice and equality for us as Black women. We're going to speak out for our rights. But the community is not healthy if we're not speaking out for everyone's rights. And so that includes the men, the children, And this is where I differentiate, because many womanists are not engaged in looking at animals or the land. Some of them are, especially looking at land, being that this definition is from Alice Walker's book, or an essay, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. And if any of you are familiar with any of Alice Walker's books, she tends to be pretty much connected with nature. There's a couple of women. I have some books next to me, so and I'll give these books. Karen Baker Fletcher, she has this book. It's called Sisters of Dust, Sisters of Spirit, Womanist Wordings on God and Creation. So but what I've noticed is that even if there are women using even the term ecowomanism, Melanie Harris just brought out a book. But Karen Baker Fletcher, long before Harris and others, had been writing on this. So, but what I did notice was there was something missing in the connection with animals. And not just for the sake of looking at animals as, of course, another being that's special in this world, but also because of the effects of animal production. I live, as you all know, in North Carolina, where the #2 state for hog farming and pig farming. And I have some relatives that have worked since the early 80s with the hog farming issues. So with looking at the environment, it's an academic role for me, but to be honest, within the past year, it's transitioning more to making sure that my church community is aware of these things. And also I'm learning, I actually just met a relative like not even 2 months ago. And I know this is God, because I've been trying to meet them for 13 years. It's actually my ex-husband's relative, but they really love me. So I'm still family, they said. But he is the co-founder of Black Workers for Justice, who also is Naima Muhammad, which works with him, is also founder of Environmental Justice Network of North Carolina. And he's really excited that I'm bringing these issues because he said they have an environmental area within Black Workers for Justice. And this is close to home for me because 90% of, as we say, 90% of Black folks are working class. They are not professionals. They're not working as professionals. They're workers. And so what we do is, and what he has been doing is representing Black workers, even when it comes to incidents where you have these, what do you call them? Where one of these corporations is something protein, where they are taking the chicken remnants, and what the boss is doing is they're creating a very stressful environment for the mostly Black workers. I'm so sorry, but mostly Black workers. Excuse me. But anyway, what we're doing though is we're trying to just stay on top of how most Black workers here are are not being supported in their jobs. The next thing that I want to look at is the challenges are that I try to remain in the mindset that I try to be nuanced as possible. Because even when I'm having discussions about the climate and the earth, some people feel helpless. And so what I do is I tell them that if we can have these discussions, we can see what little things that we can do and we could change. Because a lot of times people feel that, if I'm not making enough money to even eat, how can I even be a voice for something like environmental care? One of the books that I really liked, Rooted in Faith, Reclaiming the African-American Environmental Heritage, is by a lady named Diane Glave. And what she really brings out is that African-Americans have a continued legacy with land and religion, resistance, preservation, and conservation. And so the other thing that we know is that African Americans have this because as we know that the environmental justice movement started here in North Carolina. and in Warren County. And so what we try to do is bring these things to the forefront in the work that I'm doing with churches. This is really important for me, though, as I said, because I'm connected with many African American churches here that are Pentecostal in nature, do not care anything about the environment. And what I try to do is to show them that even in our theology or pneumatology of looking at the breath of life, the breath of life is something that is inherited, or excuse me, that is also within animals. And so I try to talk to them about that. And it doesn't go over quite as well when, you know, they're having chicken dinner sales for a fundraiser. And, you know, it doesn't go over well when I'm, you know, asked to give a talk and everything, you know, comes down to the next barbecue, you know. But what I try to do though, is I try to be aware, because so much of what we do, what is harmful or not as healthy, is a part of some people's identity. And how am I going to address this? And I even try to look at those discussions when I talk to people about racism. I understand that this is deeply embedded within people. And if they don't have the tools to try to walk that back and deconstruct why I'm thinking a certain way, or why I live my life a certain way, where I don't, you know, everything I do, I don't really care about, or my actions project that I don't care about the environment, then I feel that, and I know that that's my calling and what I'm here to do. I'm always about trying to make sure that even though I have a truth, and I really believe this is the truth that I have to share, that I share it in a way that they can receive it, you know, because, you know, you can just go out there, and I'm sure like Pastor Stephanie would understand, you can have the truth to talk to people, but if you don't have a great way of giving that, then it won't mean anything. And then, so is it more so that you can be right? And I think of Christ and Christ's messages a lot, was in delivery and being connected to the people. And then I always tell people, look, Jesus is basically a nature mystic. He wasn't in the church. He was rolling around through this, you know, through the wilderness. Those are some of the things that are important for me. And lastly, the hope that I have for continued action is what we do also is closest to us. So right now, what's closest to me right now is my family, my children. So I'm teaching them. Some people feel that, you know, gardening, how does that really help? Getting in touch with the soil. This goes to, for me, in African cosmology, and understanding that humanity, nature, and spirit are all connected. And that can be an intergenerational experience as well. So when you do have those gardening things at your churches, that's an intergenerational moment. And I know a lot of churches are dealing with some of those issues, and having not enough young people, or having too many older people at a church. Start a gardening thing, and because there are a lot of children who don't know anything about gardening, and they will be amazed when they learn about grafting plants and growing, and they can sometimes, you never know, they can actually have the thought and idea that can even enhance our gardening that we're doing today. So my main thing is that's my hope is in the children. And also I have a lot of hope in all of us as we continue to share. So thank you, and sorry for the background music.
Thank you, Candace. You brought up so many good things, and I love Jesus was a nature mystic. I think that could be a really awesome, poignant bumper sticker, and just a really great statement from you. I also think bringing up the role of teaching our children and this incredible opportunity we have to reconnect ourselves to the natural world is just so important and beautiful. And thank you for sharing your scholarship as well, and some really great books that we can all look into as we stay home. We have some good reading materials to dive into. Karen, I'm going to pass you the torch.
Hey, thank you. I just want to say thank you to Candace for showing us in real time that women are the glue holding the universe together, especially right now at this moment. So thank you for that. I apologize, I have no video. I actually put on makeup this morning for the first time in a week, I think, to get all gussing up, but I discovered that this particular computer doesn't have a camera, which I didn't even know was a thing anymore, but apparently it is. So I'm just going to be speaking, and I'm going to be talking about how faith, communities of faith, and churches and congregations, as well as denominational bodies, can organize around creation care and climate justice. And I think I can't talk about that without also talking about theology. And I feel like the best way I can talk about theology is through storytelling. So basically what I'm going to do is offer 3 stories that are connected about how the Creation Justice Network of the UCC Southern Conference evolved, and that I hope will help other people as they're wanting to create their own networks and their own faith communities, that they will find something from these stories that will be helpful for them. So my first story starts at the beginning when I was just a kid, and I had the theological belief that the earth was actually God's body, literally God's body. So I believed that when I was outside playing, that I was playing on God's body, on the surface of God's body and Jesus's body. And when I crossed the street to the post office, I thought I was walking across the body of God to reach that destination. And I think most poignant and powerful for me was when my parents at Easter time would take us to see my grandparents, who had a tobacco farm in eastern North Carolina in the Green Swamp. And my grandfather would take my sister and me down into the swamp where all the wild Easter lilies bloomed. And when I saw those Easter lilies blooming, I thought I was actually seeing the resurrection of Christ's body. So that was just an inherent intuitive belief that I had. But of course, what happened is I got older and was introduced to more formal theology, like the catechism and communicants class, and even divinity school much later. I was told, no, this belief is something that we call pantheism, and it's wrong. It's not a correct theological position to have. But I don't think I ever gave up on that belief. I think I still held on to that. So that's my first story, and then I'm going to come back to that, but let's go ahead. 40 years later, my family and I were returning from England, where I had served as a minister in Northumberland for a year, and we had decided that we would move to Asheville, and I was looking for a place for us to live, and ended up south of Asheville in Arden. And the real estate agent was showing me a house which I had decided to take. But when we entered the backyard, I saw this enormous, it looked like a pillar of smoke sitting on the horizon. And I said, what is that? And he said, that's just the Duke Energy plant. And what he meant by that was a coal burning power plant there on Lake Julian. So I didn't think anything of it. I'd never heard of it before. I didn't know anything about coal burning plants. But over the next few months, I would watch my 2 sons playing in our backyard, silhouetted against that pillar of smoke, which I learned was actually steam. They thought it was wonderful because they thought it looked like a volcanic eruption that was happening all the time. But I started reading about this. I started reading about coal burning plants. I started reading about coal ash contamination and coal ash ponds. And I became very frightened because I started also reading about the ways that human health was affected. So we moved from that area all the way to the opposite end of Asheville, to the northern end, as far away from the plant as we could go. But I just kept thinking about the people who can't move, because when I was reading about coal burning plants, I was also reading that they tended to be located in neighborhoods of people who were lower income, people of color, people who didn't have much of a voice in the world. who didn't have access to power and money. So that led me to start participating in public hearings around coal ash, including one in Rutherford County around the cliffside coal ash ponds. And I just remember listening to three very decent, hardworking people who had worked their entire lives for the little that they had, to see all of that destroyed by coal ash. And I think that was an event, that was just a turning point in my life. I went to the minister of the Southern Conference of the United Church of Christ, and I said, you know, we have to do something about this. We have to have some sort of organization or network in place so we can speak about these issues and get people to start advocating. And he said, it's fine with me as long as it's got to have justice in the title. It's got to be about justice. And I said, this is all about justice. And so that's how the Creation Justice Network was born. And our first action was to send out a petition that we had 400 clergy and lay people sign, asking Lynn Good of Duke Energy to start cleaning up coal ash in North Carolina. And we've been going strong ever since for 4.5 years now. So that's my second story. And then my third story is about 2 years after the Creation Justice Network got up and running, I was at a conference held by Wake Forest School of Divinity. And the keynote speaker of the conference was a man named William Brown from Columbia Seminary in Georgia. And he was a professor of Old Testament studies, but he was actually speaking on the prologue of John. And specifically, he was talking about the verse, "The Word became flesh." And he said that, of course, the way this verse has normally been translated is that God, or Jesus, became incarnate as a flesh of humankind. But he said this was actually a mistranslation, that the word sarkos in Koine Greek, flesh, doesn't mean human flesh, it means the flesh of everything that lives. So when we say the word becomes flesh in the Bible, when we read that in church, what we're saying is that God became incarnate as a flesh of every living being. And that was also one of those moments where everything shifted in me, because what that means is that we are blood and flesh kin with everything that lives, with all of creation. And as people of faith, if we are kindred to the earth, if earth is our blood and flesh kin, how are we going to choose to treat creation? And if creation really is God incarnate, how will we treat God through creation? And of course, what it really meant is, when I was a little kid thinking that the earth was God's, I was right. I was right all along. And I believe that. I believe today still that I am walking around on God's body when I am out in creation. So my great hope is that we as people of faith can work with other people of faith and people not of faith to teach them that earth is sacred and earth is holy, because earth is God incarnate as well. And that kinship is something that we must take seriously. And I think at this particular moment in history, we've just seen an entire continent burn. We've seen people die. We have seen over 1 billion non-human animals killed. And how can we believe that there wouldn't be consequences for that? I do believe everything is connected in creation, and now we see this horrible illness that's spreading across the globe, this pandemic. And I do believe that on some level these things are connected. We cannot have an entire continent burn without seeing some sort of very dark consequences for human health. And my hope too is that we will begin to see these connections more and more closely, these interconnections, and know that there is no such thing as human beings and the rest of creation, that we are all connected, and the source for all of us is God. And so that we will learn to treat everything as holy and sacred.
Thank you, Karen, for truly beautiful stories. I love your image of Easter lilies as the resurrection embodied. I think that's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And this reminds me of a great resource that we've put in the chat box, The Body of God by Sally McFaig. If this is something that you are resonating with, this image, there's a lot more of it. And I'm really grateful that that was uplifted. And thank you also for bringing up coal ash and these issues of justice in our state. North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light works with the Southern region with other IPL networks, Interfaith Power and Light networks, in a group called the Southeast Faith Leaders Network. And one of the issues that we work on specifically is coal ash, because a great deal of the coal ash that is being moved from North Carolina is being moved to communities of color in other states. So we have to think about this regionally, we have to think about this large scale, and thank you for participating in that good work and uplifting it as well. And now, Penny, we'll pass you the torch and then we'll prepare for some questions. Thanks again, Karen.
Yes, thank you to everybody that has spoken so far. There are hard acts to follow here, and I appreciate the time that you've given me to talk about the work that I do, which is not from a pulpit, but from an environmental activist point of view that I've taken for, about the last 50 years. We're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the first Earth Day, and I remember it well, and I have been participating in the movement ever since then. I retired from teaching at our local community college in 2010, and that freed up more time. I was a biology instructor, and that freed up more time for me to be a full-time environmental activist. While I was at the college, I did things like set up the sustainability committee and took my students to Power Shift, which was an action at the University of Maryland where we were trying to shift the power in an election year towards someone who would pay more attention to climate change. And climate change has been my very big push. That's what I work on the most. I was trained as a scientist. I've been a professional scuba diver in my life, and I have seen firsthand the importance of combating climate change. I saw that many years ago. My husband and I built a passive solar house in 1982 and lived without central air or heat for 18 years. Our kids, we have 2 children, they grew up in a house that opened the windows. And, you know, when we live right on the water, my husband's a commercial fisherman, and we have a boat basin, and they would get hot in the summertime, and they'd come and complain to me, and I would say, well, go over there to that Olympic-sized mud hole and go swim it. That was what they did, and that's how they grew up at the dead end of a dirt road. So we had a special relationship with nature because of my husband's business. Of course, you can't grow clams or shed out soft crabs or do any of the work that he does with pollution. And with that in mind, we always were focused on trying to keep the environment clean, and participated in many groups that were doing that. I became actively involved in the relationship between congregations and our response to climate change with NCIPL, North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light, back in 2006. My church is a Unitarian Universalist church, and as many of you know, or may know, we have a saying that we do deeds, not creeds. So we're very active in terms of social justice and environmental justice. And I helped start our Green Sanctuary Committee at my church, and part of the goal was to show films to our congregants and to anybody in the community, opened it up, And so in 2006, you may recall Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth. And we showed that at our church through a friend of mine who was actually the school superintendent at the time for gifted kids. And Bob Meadows was on the North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light board. And he convinced me to go to some meetings with him and that they were doing good work. And the rest is history. For the last 14 years, I've been very involved in helping North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light get the message out here at the coast. What I primarily work on here at the coast is coastal issues related to climate change and to some other industrial things that are trying to happen, like offshore oil drilling and the issues with seismic blasting, which would affect many, many of the organisms, including the entire food chain in the marine environment. That work is valid for me from both a secular and a non-secular point of view, and I work with Sierra Club. I'm a conservation chair for our local group. I serve on the statewide conservation committee, and because of my overlap with the faith community, I also volunteer with the Sierra Club on their Equity, Inclusion, and Justice statewide committee, EIJ. And that is an effort by the Big Greens, most Big Greens. I've seen this movement for 50 years with Big Greens, take into consideration the issues with animals and the earth, but how those issues affect people, the justice issues for the least among us, is now coming to the forefront in the Big Greens. And I'm talking about institutions like the Sierra Club. So I find both of those very satisfying. The idea of working through faith-based communities. The mission of NCIPL is to inspire and mobilize people of faith and conscience to take bold and just action on climate change. And that is where I think we need to now head. My experience with working with teaching environmental biology to students and knowing the science and trying to sell people on making changes by making them memorize parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and how it's increasing and how we're on a J-shaped logarithmic curve and how Al Gore is going off the deep end here. And I really have known that story for a long, long time, and it has not made a difference. The science is not handling the issue. It's a lot of reasons. It's a long-run perspective to deal with climate change, not a short run, and people tend to want to focus on more short-run issues. And so I'm frustrated by that science not working. So when I retired and focused more on the faith-based communities with NCIPL and the justice issues surrounding these issues, I found a way, if we can remind everybody about their faith and their religion. There's not a single religion or faith that I know of that doesn't have two mandates. One is the care for creation. The other is the care for the least among us. And those two basic principles run through all faiths. And if we really took them seriously and dealt with the moral responsibility that is entwined in those two tenets, we would be much, much better off. And I think that something that people can relate to. I say to folks that what I'm doing now is working from the heart, not from the head. I'm going to people's heart, and I'm saying, starting the conversation with, how are your grandkids? And we talk about the grandkids, and we begin from a position of, we all love the grandkids, we all love walking the beach with the grandkids, we all want them to grow up in a good world, and there's very few people that will argue with you on that one. So if you can start in that place with people and remind them that it's our job to take care of the future for those children, maybe you can make some headway. I don't think the science from the head of parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is going to do the same. There are people that will convince, of course, and we're very strong-minded about that, and I can argue that with anybody too. But the situation, I think, has to come down to this moral responsibility. And I think it got to be a combination of secular work and non-secular work. We need to make some really drastic changes. The issues that we face here on the coast with climate change, we have rising sea levels, changing precipitation. I can share with you the story of Florence when we had in our area 23 inches of rainfall in one day. The average rainfall for our region is 35 to 40 inches of rainfall per year. The year that Florence hit, we had 110 inches of rainfall. The year that Florence hit, my husband lost his entire fishing operation. That's not covered by insurance. The year that Florence hit, many floods happened upstream. You know this doesn't have to be just coastal flooding. So changing precipitation patterns are very real. The intensifying storms that we face. We're in the part of North Carolina that sticks out, where Cape Lookout is. And that's where the hurricanes go in at. And we've seen a lot of hurricanes, but Florence was the worst for us. And that's going to continue to get worse. It's very serious issues for us. We have ghost forests now, where salt water intrudes on the roots of the pine trees, the coastal pines, and the increased winds from the hurricanes carry salt spray, and the increased precipitation patterns bring on more of the pine bark beetle, who's an opportunistic bug that kills pine trees. We, this past year, had to have 27 pine trees cut on our 3-acre property. 2 acres of it is still standing deadfall. 2 acres of standing deadfall, which, it's great for the woodpeckers, but it's not so great for taking up moisture that we need. Our groundwater levels are rising rapidly. So all of those things are kind of my story, where I'm coming from here. We have a lot of challenges. We see that a lot of the country is focused on greed. The income disparity is ridiculous that we're facing for the workers versus the CEOs. The rate of climate change is increasing rapidly. It is that J-shaped curve that Al Gore talked about. And we still aren't able to deal with long-run issues. We do not have the political will. Think about what we're ready to do for the virus in terms of $500 million, $8 billion. They're talking billions of dollars. What if this short-run event, it will be over, it's over in China now, this short-run event what if the long run event of climate change had the same amount of money thrown at it for just the future, the ability to live life on Earth? We don't see that happening, and yet we have that moral responsibility. My hope is in good science. I think we can come up with battery storage systems and plenty of alternative energy so we don't have to burn coal. I hope and pray that we can have the political will to move forward and elect global leaders, not just in the U.S., global leaders that understand both this science and theology and how it connects, and work with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and get back to the Paris Agreement. I also hope that and pray that we will have an adherence to our moral responsibility for creation care and for care of the least among us. That is what I think will be the most important thing. Good science, political will, and recognizing our moral responsibility. That's where my hope lies. Thank you for allowing me to share this with you today. And thanks to NCIPL for all the good work you do.
Thank you, Penny. All of this was just so hopeful. I want to thank all of you, all of our speakers, for sharing your stories and your expertise and all that you've learned and your hopes, in addition to your challenges. I agree with Karen that women are holding the universe together. It's really beautiful to see all of your work and to just bear witness to it. Penny, I'm also grateful that you brought up the need for political will. And all of the stories that have been offered today are stories that can be offered to our representatives, to our elected officials, to help move the needle. So I encourage all of us on this call and in the communities that we represent and the communities that we belong to continue to call for action, large-scale action. It's also an important point that you make about the coronavirus. You know, we are mobilizing in such a powerful way around this. I have so much hope seeing the ways that communities are mobilizing in this crisis. And I hope that we take those learnings and apply them to other crises in our world, including climate change, that we realize the moral need and also the power of our communities to call for action and to have it happen, to see it happen. So thank you for bringing that up. Let's all pledge to continue to advocate for this good work to happen in big and small ways, because we need both things to make culture change and to create the sustainable, compassionate, and just world that we need. And you are all a part of that creation. So thank you again. We talked a lot and I'm just so grateful, but we are running out of time. So I'm gonna skip my questions. I have access to all of you. And those of you who are on this call, you also, I think, have access to all of these folks. I feel like if you have any questions, Karen and Stephanie and Candace and Penny, I think would be more than happy to talk to you again via email or a call. But we do have a couple minutes for a question. If you want to put a question in the chat box, we will provide this time for those questions, and then we will close with a prayer and say goodbye to each other all at once. We'll turn off our microphones and do that, which will be fun. So are there any questions from anybody in the chat box? Or if you don't have access to the chat box because you called in, I think that you can unmute yourself and ask that verbally as well. Do, right? All right. Oh, that's Penny's email. So there are some emails also in the chat box. If you want to drop your email in, then we will have that contact information. One question I was going to ask, since we don't have any questions so far from our audience or our attendees, was just, we heard Karen's wonderful biblical text, the flesh, the word made flesh. And I wondered if there was a text or just a resource, a poem maybe that you all also call on when you think about this work from each of you. We also do have a question now. So the question is, do you think the virus will help change people's minds about climate change? You can jump in either place. Anybody who wants to jump in.
Well, I'll jump in because I brought it up. I think that it will show that we can mobilize, and that if you do have the political will, which we didn't in the beginning of this crisis, we didn't have enough test kits, we didn't have enough political understanding of what it meant to go through a pandemic, and now we do. And so I think that part is hopeful, and if we can, you know, put somebody in the White House that is not a climate denier, we would be doing a whole lot better in terms of recognizing that we can do many things as individuals, as nations, as morally responsible people. Yes.
Thanks, Penny. We have another question. This is from Mary. She says, I'm interested in how womanism intersects faith-based climate work. How has that perspective aided the work you do, Candace?
I was just responding to her in that my dissertation is dealing with this. And the way that I see it is that womanism from its beginning, and even those that I would call proto-womanists, meaning womanism was even around, was doing this work and saw that. And that was Fannie Lou Hamer with her Freedom Farms, also Wangari Maathai over in Kenya. And her books especially talked about how even she was not just looking at those that came in and colonized the British. She was talking about the people, her own people, who dealt the governments that built these relationships that would then hurt the people. And she called them collaborators. So I've in turn have taken and used that term. One other person is Alvenia Fulton. Many don't know about her, but she's in Chicago. And in the 50s and 60s, started the first, she had the first herbologist store and community garden in Chicago, like tough part of Chicago. But she was also the mentor for Dick Gregory. And she was the one that actually taught him everything he knew about plant-based eating and veganism, and a lot of celebrities. So I, in turn, look at womanism. It's always been there, that this care for earth and understanding its connection with nature and spirit, honoring the land. I like what I forgot Karen was saying earlier about the body and seeing that. And I mentioned in my comment that most indigenous traditions understand God as this entire earth, and even just being as one with the universe as well. So that's where I'm doing it. It's really not anyone writing on it the way that I'm writing on it for right now. But I'm trying to make sure that I don't just stick in the academy and write papers. I want to apply it to work and be involved with people, because I have a lot of colleagues that, it's just about getting tenure and making the money. But I'm like, okay, now you're just Black capitalists. You're not doing anything. So I'm really focused on doing that with my work.
Awesome. Thank you, Candace. As a closing prayer, we are in this moment of coronavirus and uncertainty, and so many people are struggling. We know that that's it's really a difficult reality for a lot of folks. So we just want to offer our prayers and thoughts to people who are without food or who are lonely. And I encourage all of us to think about creative ways that we can show up for our communities. We also at NCIPL have been participating in daily calls through our friends at a partner organization, Green Faith. They're having daily calls at 4 p.m. That are offering interfaith kind of worship services and spiritual practices during this time of uncertainty as folks are at home. So you can participate in that today if you're free. And this is a lovely prayer that we were offered during one of our Green Faith calls. So this will be our closing. And the people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played games and learned new ways of being and were still and listened more deeply. Some meditated, some prayed, some danced. Some met their shadows, and the people began to think differently. And the people healed. And in the absence of people living in ignorant, dangerous, mindless, and heartless ways, the earth began to heal. And when the danger passed and the people joined together again, they grieved their losses and made new choices and dreamed new images and created new ways to live and heal the earth fully as they had been healed. Amen. We will include this prayer in our email with this recording. I'll also include other resources that have been offered by each of our panelists. Thank you again for joining, for being with us during this time, and we can all unmute and say goodbye in a big chorus. And thanks again. So goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
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 Have a beautiful day.
Bye. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, Penny. Thank
Nice
you,
to
everyone.
meet all the other women, too. Thank you.
Mhm.
Wonderful presentations. Thank you so much.
Mm.
Peace
Thank you
be
for
with you
joining.
all today and every
Mhm.
day.
Yes, I'm going to go do lunch and unwind. Thank you, everyone. I'm so sorry for that. I was like, oh my God, she is playing. And she kept getting
Okay.
louder and louder and louder.
It was awesome.
That's the way it goes sometimes. It's okay.
You said you wanted piano music.
It was nice.
Exactly.
What do-
Take care.